Fierce alien queen's daughters vanished, only to be found curled up on the human's chest. The emergency alarm blared through the Galactic Council station, with a sound that made every species present freeze in their tracks. It was not the usual alert for technical malfunctions or minor security breaches. This was the red-level alarm, the kind that only sounded when something catastrophically wrong had occurred. Within moments, the Grand Council chamber doors exploded inward, not from any mechanical failure, but from the sheer force of Queen S.A. Trathka's entrance. The Velkyr Queen stood nearly 8 feet tall, her crystalline exoskeleton shimmering with an angry purple hue that everyone in the galaxy had learned to fear. Her forearms were spread wide, each ending in claws that could slice through reinforced steel as easily as paper. Her eyes, multifaceted like precious gems, blazed with a fury that sent waves of telepathic rage washing over everyone in the chamber. Several diplomats collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by the psychic pressure of her emotions. "My daughters," she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of 1,000 storms. "Where are my daughters?" Princess Zira and Princess Kess had arrived at the station 3 days ago with their mother for the annual Galactic Peace Summit. The young princesses, though only children by Velkyr standards, were already formidable. They possessed the characteristic Velkyr abilities of phasing through solid matter, telepathic communication, and reflexes fast enough to catch laser fire. They were the future of the Velkyr Empire, an empire that controlled 17 star systems and had never lost a war. Ambassador Thornik of the Xinthian Collective, the current council chairman, stepped forward with 6 of his eyes focused on the Queen, while the other 6 nervously scanned for exits. "Your Majesty, please, we were not aware that the princesses were missing." "When did you last see them?" "My telepathic link to them has been blocked." It was monitored by 17 different security systems, patrolled by guards from 5 different species, and had backup power systems that could survive a direct hit from a warship. Nothing should have been able to happen there. "Initiate a complete station lockdown," Thornik ordered, his voice shaking slightly. "Pull all security footage from the gardens for the past 6 hours, deploy search teams to every sector, and someone contact the human." "The human?" asked Minister Vexali of the Ethereal Collective, her gaseous form swirling with agitation. "What does Earth's representative have to do with this?" "Standard protocol requires us to question everyone who was present." His scales were pale with stress as he displayed the security footage on the chamber's main holographic projector. The images showed the 2 Velkyr princesses entering the gardens, their small forms moving with the predatory grace characteristic of their species even in youth. They explored the exotic plants from a dozen worlds, occasionally phasing through trees or floating displays when something caught their interest. Then, near a cluster of crystalline flowers from the Vox system, they simply vanished. One moment they were there, examining a plant with interest. The next moment the space they occupied was empty. No transporter signature, no indication of phasing technology, no ripples in space-time that would indicate a cloaking device. They had simply ceased to exist on every sensor the station possessed. "This is impossible," Jaxthar rumbled, his massive hands gesturing helplessly at the footage. "Our sensors track everything from subatomic particles to dark matter fluctuations. Nothing can hide from our systems. And if I discover that any species was involved in taking my daughters..." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The Velkyr response to threats against their young was legendary and brutal. The search consumed the next 2 hours. Teams spread throughout the massive station, scanning with every type of sensor available. Telepaths from 3 different species tried to locate the princesses' mental signatures. The construct race deployed microscopic drones to search areas too small for organic beings to access. The ethereals dispersed themselves into gaseous form to seep into sealed chambers and storage areas. Nothing. During this time, every species representative was brought before the Queen for questioning. The process was terrifying. S.A. Trathka did not simply ask questions. She drove her telepathic presence into each diplomat's mind, sifting through thoughts and memories with no regard for privacy or dignity. Several representatives required medical attention afterward, their minds bruised by the psychic intrusion. The Xinthians, with their distributed consciousness, had seen nothing unusual. The ethereals, despite their ability to exist in multiple states simultaneously, detected no disturbances in the station's dimensional stability. The construct race found no evidence of digital tampering or unauthorized access to any systems. Even the Voran Empire's notorious intelligence operatives, who made a living out of knowing things others wanted hidden, had no information to offer. As the interrogations continued, someone finally mentioned the human. Dr. Marcus Webb had been assigned to the gardens at the same time as the princesses. He was Earth's first official representative to the Galactic Council, a junior diplomat who had arrived barely 3 weeks ago. From what anyone knew about him, he seemed harmless. Humans were new to the galactic community, their planet having only achieved faster-than-light travel 5 years ago. They were considered technologically primitive, physically weak, and diplomatically inexperienced. But he had been there, and he had not yet been questioned. Queen S.A. Trathka's eyes narrowed when she heard this. "Bring him to me, now." What they found instead was a simple door, unlocked, with soft sounds coming from within that their translators struggled to identify. Jaxthar raised his massive fist and pounded on the door. "Dr. Webb, this is station security. Open immediately." Then they stopped, every single one of them, frozen in complete confusion at the scene before them. The humans' quarters were modest, barely 15 square meters with a small sleeping area, a desk, and a basic hygiene station. The space was cluttered with data pads, actual paper books which were considered antiquated by most species, and images that appeared to show small furry creatures from Earth. But none of that mattered because everyone's attention was locked on the sleeping platform. Dr. Marcus Webb was asleep on his back, one arm draped across his forehead, his mouth slightly open in the vulnerable way sleeping creatures often appeared. He was a young human, perhaps in his mid-20s by Earth standards, with dark hair that stuck up at odd angles and the kind of face that seemed designed to look perpetually worried even in sleep. His other arm was curled protectively around something on his chest. That something was Princess Zira and Princess Kess. Both Velkyr princesses were curled up on the human's torso in their juvenile forms. Their normally fierce crystalline exoskeletons had softened to a pearlescent sheen, indicating deep relaxation. Princess Zira had tucked her head under Marcus's chin, her dangerous claws completely retracted and sheathed. Princess Kess was nestled against his side, one small arm draped across his chest, her breathing slow and rhythmic. Both were making a sound that the translators finally identified as purring, a noise Velkyr younglings made only when feeling completely safe and content. All three were deeply, peacefully asleep. Jaxthar's mandibles clicked in bewilderment. What? What is? Her guards had barely managed to stammer out what they had found before she pushed past them, her telepathic senses already reaching forward to confirm what seemed impossible. The moment she entered the small room and saw her daughters sleeping peacefully on the human's chest, her entire body went rigid with shock. For a long moment, the fierce queen simply stood there, staring at the scene before her. Her mind, trained through decades of warfare and political maneuvering to process information instantly and act decisively, struggled to make sense of what her eyes were showing her. Her daughters, the precious heirs to the Velkyr Empire, were not imprisoned or held hostage or injured. They were sleeping, actually sleeping, in the deep restorative way that Velkyr children almost never achieved outside their home nests. Slowly, carefully, S.A. Trathka extended her telepathic senses toward the sleeping human. She expected to find walls, defenses, perhaps some kind of mental conditioning that would explain how he had managed to capture and control her daughters. What she found instead made her draw back in surprise. Marcus's sleeping mind was completely open, unguarded in a way that would have been fatal for any species that had natural enemies. His dreams were simple and harmless, filled with images of a small orange creature with fur that her translator identified as a domestic Earth feline named Professor Whiskers. Mixed with these images were worried thoughts about an upcoming presentation to the Council and a bone-deep exhaustion from trying desperately to make a good impression on species that barely acknowledged his existence. There was no malice, no hidden agenda, no complex plan. Just a tired young human who missed his home and was trying his best in a situation far beyond his experience. Even more confusing were her daughters' minds. When she touched their consciousness with her telepathic probe, she found contentment, warmth, and safety. These were not emotions that came easily to Valkyr children. From birth, they were raised to be alert, suspicious, always ready for danger. It was how the Valkyr had survived and thrived in a hostile galaxy. Yet here were Zira and Kess, experiencing a depth of peace and security that S.A. Trathka herself had rarely felt even in the most fortified locations of her empire. The sound of movement made everyone tense. Marcus was beginning to wake, disturbed by the presence of so many beings in his small quarters, and perhaps by the weight of the Queen's telepathic examination. His eyes fluttered open slowly, confusion crossing his face as his brain tried to process why his room was full of armed guards, and why the most terrifying being in the known galaxy was standing 3 feet away from his bed. His gaze traveled down to his chest, where both princesses were still sleeping peacefully, and his eyes went wide with the kind of fear that only comes from realizing you have made a catastrophic mistake without knowing how you made it. His face went pale, and when he tried to speak, his voice came out as a squeaky whisper that cracked halfway through. "I can explain." "You will," she said, her voice carrying the promise of extreme consequences if his explanation was not satisfactory. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat visibly working. He looked down at the sleeping princesses on his chest, then back up at the Queen, then at the circle of armed guards surrounding his bed. Very carefully, moving as slowly as possible to avoid waking the children, he began to speak. "I was in the gardens," he started, his voice shaking. "I was alone looking at pictures from home. I've been here 3 weeks now, and everything is so different, and everyone is so much more advanced than humans, and I just felt really homesick, you know." He paused, seeming to realize that admitting weakness to a warrior species might not be the best strategy, but he continued anyway. "I might have been crying a little, just a little. I was looking at pictures of my cat. It was coming from behind these big crystal plants, the blue ones with the spiral petals. I went to investigate, and I found them." He glanced down at the princesses. They were phasing in and out, flickering like a bad hologram, and they looked scared, lost maybe. I don't know much about Valkyr psychology, but scared children look the same across most species, I think. "I know everyone says the Valkyr are dangerous," Marcus went on, his words coming faster now as if he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. "And they are, obviously, but these were just kids. They were scared and alone, and I couldn't just walk away. I'm a xenopsychologist, or at least I was training to be one before I got this assignment. My specialty was cross-species emotional development in juvenile populations." He laughed nervously. "Which is a fancy way of saying I studied how different species children grow up and feel emotions. I told them about Earth, about Professor Whiskers, about how I was scared and far from home too. I showed them pictures on my tablet. Cats, dogs, my nephew's birthday party, human stuff. I could tell which one was which from the patterns on their exoskeletons. She was curious about my tablet, about the pictures. Then she touched my hand, and I guess she liked how it felt. I'm warm compared to most species on the station. Humans maintain a pretty high body temperature. Kess came over too, and they both just started examining me like I was some kind of interesting science project. She was listening to my heartbeat. I remembered reading in the xenobiology database that rhythmic sounds and steady vibrations have a calming effect on most species with developed auditory systems. The human heartbeat is relatively slow and very steady, around 60 to 70 beats per minute when we're relaxed. It makes sense that it would be soothing. They just stayed there listening, Marcus explained, and they started to relax. Their phasing stopped, their exoskeletons changed color to that pearl shade, and they started making this purring sound. I've heard that sound in the database recordings. It means they feel safe. So I just sat with them. I figured eventually they would wake up or want to leave, and then I would take them back to wherever they belonged. They're warm, and I've been so stressed since I got here, and their purring was actually really soothing. I thought I would just rest my eyes for a minute while they slept, and then—" He trailed off, looking at the Queen helplessly. "I fell asleep too, didn't I? I'm so sorry. I should have called security immediately, but I didn't want to wake them, and my communicator was on my desk across the room. And I thought they would wake up naturally, and I could ask them where they lived. And I just made a really bad decision, and I'm probably going to be executed now, aren't I?" The room was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, one of the Queen's advisors stepped forward. He was an older Velkyr with silvered edges to his exoskeleton, and he carried himself with the authority of someone who had served the royal family for many years. He leaned close to the queen and began speaking in rapid, quiet clicks that the translators struggled to process. S.A. Trathka listened, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her head of security. "Show me the biological scans of this room," she ordered. Jaxthar quickly pulled up the data on a portable display. The readings showed elevated levels of oxytocin in Marcus's system, a human bonding hormone that increased during positive social interactions. The stress hormone cortisol was nearly absent in all three sleeping beings. Most remarkably, the Velkyr princesses showed neural patterns consistent with true REM cycle sleep, the deep restorative state that even adult Velkyr rarely achieved outside their most secure sanctuaries. A medical specialist from the Queen's entourage examined the data and spoke urgently. "Your Majesty, these readings are extraordinary. The princesses have achieved deeper rest in these few hours than they have in the entire 3 days since arriving at the station. Their stress pheromones have completely normalized. This human has somehow created an environment where they feel safer than they do even in our own secured quarters." "Tell me about humans," she said to her intelligence officer. "Everything." "Humans are pack-bonding omnivores from a Class M planet they call Earth. They evolved as persistence hunters and social creatures. Their young are born completely helpless and require years of constant care to reach maturity, which has made them extremely sensitive to vulnerability and distress in others. They produce specific hormones, primarily oxytocin and vasopressin, that create powerful bonding impulses not just with their own species, but with virtually any creature they perceive as needing care or companionship. They have a documented history of domesticating other species not for food or labor, but purely for companionship. They form emotional attachments to virtually anything, including species that are their natural predators, creatures with no capacity for reciprocal bonding, and even mechanical objects. Their literature and culture are filled with stories of caring for orphaned or injured creatures from other species. They appear to be biologically compelled to respond to distress signals, particularly from juvenile beings, regardless of whether those beings are human or not. Their survival strategy throughout their evolution was cooperation, community, and mutual support. Where other species evolved to become stronger or faster or more dangerous, humans evolved to become better at working together and taking care of each other. And apparently, that instinct extends across species boundaries. But here was a species that operated on completely different principles, and somehow those principles had accomplished something her own might could not. She made a decision. Slowly, deliberately, the Queen lowered herself to the floor beside Marcus's sleeping platform, making her massive form smaller and less threatening. She began making soft, clicking sounds in her native language, a tone that no translator in the room had ever heard from her before because it was the sound Velkyr mothers used only in the most private moments with their young children. The princesses stirred at the familiar sound. Their eyes opened slowly, and when they saw their mother sitting beside them, they made apologetic chittering noises but did not immediately leave the warmth and safety of Marcus's chest. Through the translator, Zira's small voice said, "We did not mean to cause alarm, Mother. We were lost and frightened, and the human helped us. His heart sounds like the star songs of the nursery moons on our homeworld. He smells like safety." It was a strange sound, half clicking and half humming, and it made her guards exchange shocked glances. The fierce queen who had conquered star systems and destroyed entire fleets was laughing at the awkward comment of a nervous human who still looked like he expected to be executed at any moment. "Dr. Webb," the queen said, and her voice had lost its threatening edge. "I must thank you for caring for my daughters when they needed help. You showed them kindness when you had every reason to be afraid. That is worth more than you know. The Velkyr Empire would like to propose a formal alliance with Earth, not because your species is powerful or advanced, but because you possess something we lack. You make others feel safe. In a galaxy full of dangers and threats, that is perhaps the rarest and most valuable ability of all." Marcus blinked in confusion, still trying to process the fact that he was not going to be executed and that he had somehow stumbled into creating an interstellar alliance while taking a nap. Over the following weeks, the story of the human and the Velkyr princesses spread throughout the galaxy. Marcus became an unofficial ambassador, his natural empathy and ability to connect with others making him invaluable in diplomatic situations. The princesses visited him regularly, still insisting on their naps listening to his heartbeat, much to their mother's amused tolerance. The Galactic Council learned an important lesson that day. Humanity's greatest strength was not in their weapons or their technology or their tactical abilities. It was in their fundamental biological need to care for others, to create safety and community, to reach out to those in need regardless of how different or dangerous they might be. In a galaxy that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war, humans offered something revolutionary, the art of peace through compassion. And sometimes, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. 3 weeks had passed since the incident that had nearly sparked an interstellar war, but instead had created the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. The Galactic Council station had settled into a new rhythm, one that accommodated the strange friendship between Earth's awkward diplomat and the heirs to the most feared empire in known space. Marcus Webb had gone from being the nervous junior representative that most species ignored to being someone that even the most powerful beings in the galaxy treated with careful respect. The change had not been easy for Marcus to adjust to. He still woke up some mornings convinced that the entire situation was an elaborate dream, and that he would open his eyes to find himself back in his small apartment on Earth, late for his university classes. Instead, he would open his eyes to find Princess Zira sitting on his desk, watching him sleep with the patient curiosity that Velkyr children displayed toward things that fascinated them, or Princess Kess reorganizing his book collection according to some logic that only made sense to her young mind. The princesses had essentially adopted him, a fact that amused Queen S.A. Trathka and terrified most of the station's other inhabitants. Every day, without fail, the two young Velkyr would appear at Marcus's quarters. Sometimes they wanted to explore the station with him, their natural predatory instincts safely channeled into investigating maintenance tunnels and storage areas that Marcus would rather not think about too carefully. Other times, they simply wanted to listen to his heartbeat, curling up against him while he worked on his reports or read his books, their presence somehow making the isolation of deep space feel less overwhelming. Marcus had tried to explain to them that he had duties and responsibilities, that he could not simply spend all his time entertaining two alien princesses, no matter how important they were. The princesses had responded by following him to council meetings, sitting quietly in the corners while Marcus presented Earth's proposals on agricultural exchange or medical cooperation. Their presence had an unexpected effect on the proceedings. Diplomats who might have dismissed Earth's ideas out of hand suddenly paid very close attention, acutely aware that the heirs to the Velkyr Empire were watching and listening to everything. Queen S.A. Trathka had also become a regular presence in Marcus's life, though in a very different way than her daughters. She would arrive unannounced, her guards clearing the corridors before her to observe how Marcus interacted with Zira and Kess. At first, Marcus had been terrified during these visits, convinced that he was being evaluated for some failure or mistake. But gradually, he came to understand that the Queen was not judging him. She was learning from him. One evening, about a month after the incident, S.A. Trathka arrived at Marcus's quarters alone, without guards or attendants. This was so unprecedented that Marcus actually checked his door panel twice to confirm that it was really her. The Queen entered his small space, and even though she tried to make herself less imposing, her sheer physical presence filled the room. "Dr. Webb," she said, her voice carrying none of its usual commanding tone, "I would speak with you about my daughters. And about humanity." Instead, they both ended up sitting on the floor, which felt absurdly casual for a conversation with one of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. The princesses were spending the evening with other Velkyr younglings who had arrived on the station, giving Marcus a rare break from his unofficial babysitting duties. "Since the day you cared for Zira and Kess," the Queen began, "I have been studying your species extensively. Not just the official reports and data that Earth provided to the Council, but everything we could find about how humans actually live and think and feel. What I have discovered troubles me deeply, Dr. Webb. Not because I fear your species, but because I fear what we have lost." The Velkyr have been apex predators for 2 million years, S.A. Trathka said, her claws absently tracing patterns on the floor. We evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill everything else. We developed our abilities, our strength, our telepathy, all as weapons and defenses. We learned that showing weakness meant death, that trust was a liability, that the only safety came from being more dangerous than anything else around us. And it worked. We survived. We thrived, we built an empire. Our families are bound by telepathic links because we cannot trust emotional bonds alone. Our entire society is built on strength and fear because those are the only foundations we know how to construct. And I never questioned any of it until I saw my daughters sleeping on your chest. I just helped two scared children. Anyone would have done the same. They would have run away as fast as possible, or they would have contacted security from a safe distance, or they would have tried to use the situation for political advantage. But you, Dr. Webb, you sat down with them. You showed them pictures of your cat. You let them listen to your heartbeat until they felt safe enough to sleep. You did not see potential hostages or political complications or dangerous predators. You saw children who needed help. That is not how intelligent species typically behave toward each other. We compete, we form alliances based on mutual benefit, we cooperate when it serves our interests. But what you did was different. You helped because not helping would have felt wrong to you. Your species has weaponized compassion, Dr. Webb, and you do not even realize it. We evolved to take care of each other because we were not strong enough or fast enough to survive alone. Our babies are helpless for years. Our sick and injured need constant care. We had to develop strong social bonds and the ability to feel empathy even for those outside our immediate group, or we would have gone extinct. It is not a strategy or a tactic. It is just how we are built. When Zira and Kes felt safe with you, it was not because you were using some technique or following some protocol. It was because every cell in your body was telling them that you meant them no harm, that you would protect them if needed, that they could trust you completely. That kind of authenticity cannot be faked or manufactured. It simply is. I want you to come to the Velkyr homeworld. I want you to meet with our educators, our psychologists, our leaders. I want them to understand what you have shown me. Not so that we can become like humans, but so that perhaps we can remember what we lost when we became so focused on survival that we forgot how to live. Marcus felt his heart racing at the thought of visiting the Velkyr homeworld, a place that most species only saw in there. Nightmares or military briefings about places to avoid at all costs. But he could see the sincerity in the Queen's eyes, the genuine hope that somehow this awkward human from a primitive backwater planet might help one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations find something they did not even know they were missing. I will need to get permission from Earth, Marcus said slowly, and probably about 17 different clearances from the Council, but yes, Your Majesty, I will come. Earth's government was simultaneously thrilled and terrified at the prospect of their representative visiting the Velkyr homeworld. The Galactic Council had to create entirely new protocols for a human visiting a high-threat world. Insurance companies tried to figure out how to calculate risk premiums for a situation that had never occurred before in galactic history. Through it all, Marcus continued his daily routine, still spending time with the princesses, still presenting Earth's proposals to the Council, still being the same awkward but genuine person he had always been. Finally, the day came for the journey to begin. The Velkyr Royal Transport was unlike any ship Marcus had ever seen, more fortress than vessel, bristling with weapons and shields that could probably destroy a small moon. Queen S.A. Trathka had insisted on personally escorting him, and Zira and Kes were beside themselves with excitement at the prospect of showing their human friend their home. As the ship entered faster-than-light travel, Marcus stood at an observation window, watching the stars stretch into impossible lines. Beside him, Princess Zira practiced her English, a language she had been learning specifically to communicate better with him. "You will like our world," she said, her translator rendering her clicks and chitters into words. "It has 3 moons and the singing crystals that grow in the deep caves. Mother says you will stay in the royal nest, which is the greatest honor. And the memorial gardens for warriors who died protecting the empire, and the kitchens where they make the sweet mineral cakes, and everything else." He was about to become one of the first humans to visit an alien homeworld, to walk among a species that the galaxy feared, to somehow bridge a gap that was millions of years wide. It should have been impossible. It probably was impossible. But then again, a month ago it had seemed impossible that two fierce alien princesses would choose to take naps on his chest, and yet here they were. Queen S.A. Trathka approached, moving with the silent grace that all Velkyr possessed. "You are afraid," she observed, her telepathic senses reading his emotional state easily. "Terrified," Marcus admitted, seeing no point in lying to someone who could literally feel his emotions. "I have no idea what I am doing, Your Majesty. I am not a diplomat or a psychologist or anyone important. I am just a graduate student who got assigned to the council, because I was the only xenopsychology specialist available when Earth got its membership approved. I am completely unqualified for any of this. But you know how to make frightened children feel safe. You know how to offer comfort without expectation of reward. You know how to be genuinely kind in a galaxy that has mostly forgotten what genuine kindness looks like. Those qualifications may be exactly what we need. We have built an empire that spans light years and commands the respect or fear of every species we encounter. But we have never learned what you did naturally in a garden while missing your cat. We have never learned how to make others feel truly safe. If you can teach us even a fraction of that, you will have given us something more valuable than any military victory." Marcus looked at the stretched stars outside the window, then at the two princesses who were now arguing about which sight they should show him first when they arrived home, then back at the queen who had traveled from seeing him as a potential threat to seeing him as something like hope. He thought about Professor Whiskers back on Earth, about his nephew who gave hugs to anyone who looked sad, about all the small acts of kindness that humans performed every day without thinking about them because it was just what felt right. Maybe, he thought, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe the galaxy did not need another warrior species, or another technological marvel, or another empire built on power and fear. Maybe what the galaxy needed was someone who knew how to sit with scared children until they felt safe enough to sleep. Maybe that was a superpower after all, just a different kind than anyone had expected. The ship hummed around them, carrying them toward a world of crystalline spires and ancient predators and possibilities that no one had imagined before a homesick human had shown two lost princesses what compassion looked like. And in that moment, despite his fear and his doubts and his certainty that he was completely out of his depth, Marcus felt something that surprised him. He felt hope. Not just for himself, but for all the species in the galaxy who had spent so long learning how to survive that they had forgotten how to truly live together. If two fierce alien princesses could learn to feel safe with a human, then maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could learn something new about what it meant to be strong. Not through weapons or fear or conquest, but through the simple, revolutionary act of caring for each other. The journey continued, carrying them all toward an uncertain future that somehow felt full of promise. The Velkyr homeworld of S.A. Trathos appeared in the viewscreen like a jewel carved from twilight and storm clouds. 3 moons hung in different phases across the purple-tinged sky, casting overlapping shadows that created patterns of light and dark across the planet's surface. The world below was covered in crystalline forests that caught the light and reflected it in 1,000 different colors, mountain ranges that looked like they had been carved by angry gods, and vast oceans that glowed with bioluminescent life beneath the waves. Marcus pressed his face closer to the observation window, his breath fogging the glass as he tried to take in every detail. He had seen pictures and videos during his research, but nothing had prepared him for the raw, fierce beauty of the world below. It looked exactly like the kind of place that would produce a species like the Velkyr, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. "Home," Princess Zira said softly beside him, and there was something in her voice that made Marcus glance down at her. The young Velkyr was staring at her world, with an expression that transcended species boundaries. It was the look of someone seeing something they loved after being away, a mixture of joy and relief, and belonging that Marcus recognized because he felt the same way every time he saw Earth from space. The landing process was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. The Velkyr did not simply descend gently to a spaceport like most civilized species. Instead, their ship dove toward the surface at speeds that made Marcus's stomach attempt to relocate to his throat. only pulling up at the last possible moment to settle on a massive landing platform that jutted out from a cliff face thousands of feet above a valley floor. When Marcus finally managed to unclench his hands from the safety harness, he found Princess Kess watching him with what he had learned to recognize as amusement. "You did not enjoy the landing approach?" she asked, her head tilting in the characteristic Velkyr gesture of curiosity. "I enjoyed not dying," Marcus replied, his voice still slightly shaky. "The part where we almost crashed into the planet was less enjoyable. Also, it looks impressive, which is important when one rules an empire." S.A. Trathos smelled like ozone, and something sharp that his translator identified as mineral compounds with no Earth equivalent. The air was thinner than Earth's, making him slightly lightheaded, though the medical team had assured him that humans could breathe it safely with only minor discomfort for the first few days. What waited outside the ship made Marcus stop in his tracks. Hundreds of Velkyr had gathered on the landing platform and the terraces below it. They ranged from enormous adults whose crystalline exoskeletons had darkened with age to tiny younglings who barely reached Marcus's knee. All of them were silent, watching, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the light from the three moons above. It was the most intimidating welcome Marcus could possibly imagine. "They have come to see the human who made the princesses purr," Queen S.A. Trathka said, amusement evident in her tone. "Word has spread throughout our world about what happened on the council station. My people are curious about you, Dr. Webb. We do not often encounter beings who confuse us, and you have managed to confuse us quite thoroughly. I just helped some lost kids." Apparently, his complete inability to understand how significant his actions had been struck the Velkyr as genuinely funny. Princess Zira took his hand, her claws carefully retracted so as not to cut his skin. "Come," she said. "We will show you the royal nest. You will like it. It has soft surfaces for sitting, and the acoustics make heartbeats sound very clear." The royal nest turned out to be a massive structure carved directly into the cliff face, with chambers that ranged from intimate rooms barely large enough for two beings to vast halls that could hold thousands. The walls were made of the same crystalline material that grew naturally on S.A. Trathos, though these had been shaped and smoothed by generations of Velkyr artisans. Light from the three moons filtered through the crystal, creating an ever-changing display of colors and shadows that was simultaneously beautiful and slightly disorienting. Marcus was given quarters that had been hastily modified for human habitation. Someone had installed a bed that was soft by Velkyr standards, which meant it was only moderately uncomfortable for a human. There was a food preparation area stocked with synthesized meals based on Earth cuisine, though the Velkyr chefs had clearly never actually tasted the foods they were replicating. And there was a window that looked out over a valley where crystalline trees grew as tall as skyscrapers, their branches chiming softly when the wind moved through them. "These are the singing forests," Princess Kess explained, pointing out the window. The crystals resonate at different frequencies based on their size and composition. Our ancestors used to navigate by the songs before we developed modern technology. Now we mostly just find them beautiful. For all its strangeness and danger, S.A. Trathos had moments of genuine beauty that reminded him that beauty was universal, just expressed differently across species. The next several days fell into a pattern that Marcus found both exhausting and fascinating. Each morning, he would wake to find the princesses already in his room, having phased through the walls because doors were apparently optional for young Velkyr. They would insist on having breakfast with him, during which they would describe everything they wanted to show him that day with the boundless enthusiasm that seemed to be universal to children regardless of species. Then Queen S.A. Trathka would arrive with various Velkyr specialists, educators, psychologists, and leaders who wanted to understand the human approach to childcare, emotional development, and social bonding. These sessions were initially awkward, with Marcus trying to explain concepts that seemed obvious to him, but were revolutionary to beings who had spent millions of years evolving in completely different directions. "On Earth," Marcus explained during one session with a group of Velkyr educators, "we have something called attachment theory. The basic idea is that children who form secure emotional bonds with caregivers in their early years develop better emotional regulation, stronger social skills, and more resilience to stress as adults. The key is not just meeting physical needs like food and shelter, but also providing consistent emotional support, responding to distress with comfort, and creating an environment where the child feels safe enough to explore and learn. One of the educators, an elderly Velkir, named Th Carax, whose exoskeleton had turned almost silver with age, clicked thoughtfully. But safety is relative, is it not? On our world, a child who feels too safe may not develop the wariness necessary for survival. Our young must learn to be alert, to recognize threats, to defend themselves. Your approach would create vulnerable adults. Or would it create adults who are secure enough in themselves to take appropriate risks, who have the emotional resources to handle stress without becoming overwhelmed, who can form genuine connections with others instead of only maintaining alliances based on fear and mutual benefit? The room fell silent as the Velkir educators considered this. Finally, Th Carax spoke again. You suggest that true strength comes not from learning to fear everything, but from learning that some things can be trusted. That is a difficult concept for our species. And I am not suggesting that Velkir children should be raised exactly like human children. Your world is different, your needs are different, your history is different. But maybe there is some middle ground. Maybe your children can learn both caution and trust, both strength and connection. Maybe they do not have to choose between being safe and feeling safe. These conversations continued throughout Marcus's visit, gradually becoming more natural as the Velkir began to understand human perspectives, and Marcus learned to frame his ideas in ways that made sense to a warrior species. But the real education happened in the informal moments, when Marcus would simply spend time with Velkir younglings who had gathered around him with the same curiosity their adults showed. The young Velkir were simultaneously adorable and terrifying. They had all the natural weapons and abilities of their species, but lacked the control and judgment of adults. Marcus quickly learned to watch for the telltale shimmer that meant a youngling was about to phase through something, and to keep his hands away from tiny claws that extended without warning when a child got excited. But he also saw how they responded to gentle voices, to patient explanations, to the same kind of attention and care that worked with human children. One afternoon, Marcus was sitting in one of the royal nest's gardens, a space filled with carefully cultivated crystals that grew in specific patterns to create harmonious sounds. A group of about 10 Velkir younglings had surrounded him, listening as he read from a human storybook that he had brought from Earth. The story was a simple one about a lost duckling finding its way home, but the young Velkir listened with rapt attention, their bodies unconsciously swaying with the rhythm of his voice. When he finished, one of the smallest younglings, barely bigger than a house cat, climbed into his lap and pressed its head against his chest in the same gesture that Zira and Kes had used. Within moments, several others had joined in, creating a pile of young Velkir all seeking the comfort of his heartbeat and warmth. Marcus sat very still, hardly daring to breathe, acutely aware that he was holding the children of the galaxy's most dangerous species, and that any parent watching might interpret this as a threat. But when he looked up, he saw Velkir adults gathered at the edges of the garden, watching silently. Their expressions were difficult to read, but Marcus thought he saw something like wonder in their multifaceted eyes. They were seeing their children, their fierce and dangerous offspring who were bred to be warriors and rulers, behaving in a way they had never seen before. They were seeing their young ones choose vulnerability, choose trust, choose comfort over constant vigilance. Queen S.A. Trathka appeared among the watching adults, and Marcus tensed, worried that he had overstepped some boundary he did not know existed. But the queen simply observed for a long moment, then spoke in her own language, her words translated for Marcus by the device in his ear. "This is what I wanted my people to see," she said, not to Marcus but to the gathered adults. "Not weakness, not vulnerability that endangers, but the possibility that our children might grow up with less fear, more joy, and still become the strong leaders our empire needs. Perhaps even stronger, because they will lead not only through fear but through genuine loyalty and connection. We cannot simply change millions of years of evolution and culture overnight. We do not know how to be like the human. You need to be like yourselves, but maybe with some new tools in addition to the ones you already have. Keep teaching your children to be strong and aware and capable, but also teach them that there are times when it is okay to rest, to trust, to seek comfort. Teach them that true strength includes knowing when to be fierce and when to be gentle. You are already amazing parents who produce remarkable children. I am just suggesting that you add something to what you already do, not replace it. Change was frightening, especially for a species that had survived by being unchanging in their core nature. But the evidence was literally piled in Marcus's lap, 10 young Velkyr sleeping peacefully in a way their parents had never seen before. As the 3 moons rose higher in the sky, creating new patterns of light through the crystal garden, Marcus sat with his pile of sleeping alien children and realized something profound. He had come to S.A. Trathos thinking he would teach the Velkyr about human ways, about compassion and emotional bonding and childcare. But what he was really doing was helping them remember something they had lost long ago, something that perhaps every intelligent species had before the harsh realities of survival stripped it away. He was helping them remember that before they were warriors or rulers or apex predators, they were parents and children, connected by bonds that went deeper than strategy or survival. He was helping them remember that the fiercest love was not the kind that conquered empires, but the kind that made children feel safe enough to sleep. And in doing so, Marcus was becoming something he had never expected to be. Not a diplomat or a teacher or a bridge between species, though he was all of those things. He was becoming a symbol of what the galaxy could be if it chose compassion over conquest, if it valued connection as much as strength, if it remembered that every fierce warrior had once been a child who needed comfort. The future remained uncertain, but as Marcus sat in the crystal garden with sleeping Velkyr younglings purring against his chest, he thought that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was ready to learn something new about what it meant to be strong.